Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Crazy Lake Show here at Homesteading Off the Grid. Excuse me, I just had a wonderful lunch. While we're here today, I want you to pay very special close attention to the background. This would be the ground behind me, back there. Watch for movement of what I think may or may not be a puma, a mountain lion. Ran me out of here just a couple days ago. But what others think might be well, I mean, that's me, Crazy Lake. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, you know what I mean, right? Okay. I've fallen in love with another woman, just like the title suggests. And she's convinced me that certain things I thought were true have been lies all along. Most of you, according to my Google Analytics, are older than me who watch this, or my age at least. So I know you remember the Paul Harvey show and the rest of the stories he would tell on the radio. I'm sorry, we went into town, had an excellent lunch. I never give props because usually most places we go, they're okay at best. The servers could care less if you're even there. Sometimes they look like they're put out that you show up because they have to do something. Wasn't the case today. Not sponsored, but I'm going to put it out there. Mellow Mushroom. Yeah, I know you're thinking, oh, that's what you take before you make these videos. No, I watched a really neat movie the other night about that. It was called Midsummer. Freaky movie. But it's a pizza place down on the corner there at the University of Virginia there in Charlottesville. We went down there today. It was delicious. And the best part was our waitress, Neha. Good luck this summer. Just getting ready to go home for the summer. Best service we've had in years. I mean, just wonderful. So anyway, now that I've explained myself, I probably will not be trying to hold in my belches on camera. I think that took care of it. So here's what's going on. You remember Paul Harvey's The Rest of the Stories? This is going to end up being something like that because I had an aha moment after really spending time with this wonderful woman I've fallen in love with. I'm going to tell you her name. You can Google her. She's real. Check it all out. I'm not lying to you, brah. Her name is Edith Wharton. Wharton. Edith Wharton. Now, most of you are like, oh yeah, the writer. Hey, if you don't know who she is, you're missing out. Your life is not as high quality as it could be if you were to go read some of this woman's work. She was the first Pulitzer Prize winning female. She was born in the mid to late 1800s to a very wealthy family. As a matter of fact, you've all heard it said, keeping up with the Joneses. Her maiden name was Jones. Her family, I think Boston is where they were from. No, I'm wrong. Maybe New York. I think it was New York. They were New York socialites. Big time trust babies, generational wealth. And that family is where that expression actually comes from. Because they lived in like this neighborhood where anytime anybody would have improvements on their land or their house, of course, well, the neighbors would start doing it. And since they had the most money, they usually did it first. And so everybody got into this race of trying to keep up with the Joneses. You know, they just had another 50-horse stable built on their estate. So the neighbors got to do that too, so they don't get left behind, right? That's where the expression keeping up with the Joneses comes from. So anyway, and the pollen is very high today, so please excuse me if I'm a little runny of nose and red of eyes. It's trust me, brah, no mellow mushrooms here. It's a great place to eat lunch in Charlottesville, but I'm not taking no mellow mushrooms up in here, brah. Food was good too. Service was the best part. And price was reasonable. So I'm always reading. I'm an avid reader. I know you're thinking this is boring. Can you get on with it? Well, I am. I'm explaining myself some more, like with the burps I had there. At any given time, I'm usually reading at least 2, but sometimes 3 books. I'm a voracious reader, sometimes reading as many as 150 novels a year. I'm a writer, and so that's part of my job. So at any given time, I'm reading a novel or short stories based upon just my desire to study the style of the writer. Are there things that writer does that I could implement in my own writing to maybe make myself a stronger writer? And that's fun at times, but at other times it's not, because sometimes you'll just grab a book that really sucks, but you've got to keep reading it because you're not necessarily reading it for the story as much as it is you're reading it to study the style of the author. Okay, and then during that same time while I'm doing that, I'm usually reading something that I enjoy, like a novel just for the sake of enjoyment. Usually a Stephen King novel. He's my favorite writer. I've said it before. And no, I still haven't read all of his books, and who has? I watched an interview with him and his son, Joe Hill. It's a pen name. That's his pen name his son uses because he didn't want to get famous because of who his dad was, but he takes his dad on all of his tours with him. So, and it's no secret. But no, he's a good writer, though. I've read NOS 4182, which it's a license plate. If you put it together, it looks like Nosferatu. One of the best books I've ever read. Second best vampire book I've ever read. Second only to his daddy, Salem's Lot. I read that book twice, gave me both nightmares both times. So I'm usually reading something for enjoyment, and then a lot of times I'll have a collection of short stories. So if I just say want to read for 20 minutes before taking a nap in the afternoon, I'll break that out, read a short story. So this is kind of how I came to discover Edith Wharton. And I know I hear what you're saying. You're like, come on, weren't you forced to read her in high school and college like everybody else? Probably, but I didn't read it. And then I talked my way through class as if I had, because I've always had the gift of gab. Recently, just the other day, I was reading in a collection of short stories. I read, what's his name? Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville, the guy that wrote Moby Dick. And I read Moby Dick, back when I was in the Philippines. I've never read that short story before, but I remember discussing it in English literature, whatever number class, and the professor kept calling on me because he liked the way I viewed the story, and I had never read it. And I read it there, and I'm like, how did I BS my way through that? I was like that guy's favorite student. So anyway, there's so many books out there, so many great ones, so many great writers. It's like, yeah, I mean, even a guy that reads 150 books a year, and who has for many years. I mean, I've read more than 1,000 books in the last decade, guarantee it. I mean, there's so many out there. It takes me a while to get around to coming across some of them. So I've recently come across Edith Wharton, some of her short stories. I loved her writing and her style so much. I was like, I've got to get more from this woman. So I bought a short story collection of she's written like 85 short stories. I don't know how many novels. But I got one collection of her short stories, and I ordered 3 of her novels, House of Mirth, something else, and then the one I'm almost finished reading right now called Ethan Frome. And this is what brings up today's discussion. Here is where I'm going to dispel a story that I've always heard one way, that I think many of you have probably heard the same way. It's a story that I thought was about choice, personal choice. And it still is. It still is. And I'm not making excuses for the individual in the story who made poor choices. But in the book, slipped my mind, Ethan Frome. It's interesting. It was written in 1926. And I always wondered, did they make a movie about this? Because one of the things I love to do is to read a book and then find the movie based upon the book and then watch it and do like a comparison and a contraction. But I never watch a movie first. I always read the book first. And I thought, well, did they make a movie out of this? So I Googled it, and they did. And the movie's name is Ethan Frome. And it's 1993. I thought, wow, you talk about a powerful piece of literature. They made a movie based on the book, but it wasn't until 70 years later. That means this story is enduring. The main character, and I'm not going to give any spoilers for anybody who hasn't read it. Oh, but the movie, it stars Liam Neeson, who's one of my wife's favorite actors, and I really like Liam Neeson too. And so we're looking forward to watching the movie after I finish the book, which will probably be after I finish this video because it's only like 105 pages long. It's more like a long short story, probably a novella, 20,000 words, if that. But it's okay, 1926, right? Think about mental health. How much more we know about it and understand about it now than we did in 1926. Okay? So keep that in your brain. And then also think of this. I'm convinced of this. For some reason, I've been on like a stories written in the mid 1800s kick here this year. I've been reading novels written in the 1850s. You want a good one? I read, what was it called? Because I read a book called Why She Drank, written by a woman. It was nonfiction. It was about women who were problem drinkers, and she kept mentioning a book in that called 10 Nights in a Bar Room and What I Saw There. That's it, right? It sounds like a crazy YouTube video title. Written in like 1855. I read it. It was a great book. If you've never read any of the super old stuff that's not popular, go back and read it. Some of it's pretty good. So anyway, because the point of that was the woman who wrote the book about problem drinking and alcohol use dependency and alcoholism and all this stuff kept referencing that book because it's really neat. And here's what I was going to tell you to keep in your brain is that people really haven't changed much in the last, who knows, probably in forever. Yeah, we live longer, we live healthier, and this is because of advancements in medicine and technology. Our technology, of course. I'm sitting in the woods behind my house right now making a video that within 20 minutes of me clicking stop is going to be available for anybody in the world to see that, 5,000 or 6,000 of you will watch. Every now and then I nail the algorithm or something and 5 or 6 million of the folks out there will watch. But it's amazing technology. But I'm probably not too unlike whoever was living on this land in this house, our house built in 1903, 100 years ago. As far as personality, now our personalities, of course, would be a lot different because we're different people, but maybe not. If we had similar backgrounds, similar upbringings, they might not be. Ignore the plane. Look at that. We're talking about technology. 100 years ago, you wouldn't have heard that. You would have been on YouTube. Get this. What is this? Think about 1922. You're at home. You're on your laptop. You're watching a video on the internet. You wouldn't have heard that plane because that plane wouldn't have been there because it was 1922, brah. It's amazing. Okay. But the woman was making comparisons in regard to how the people in that book written in 1850 were behaving once they were consuming alcohol. And she was comparing it to what the science can now tell us as to why they behave that way because of the effects that alcohol has on your system, your body's system. So this is just the way the mind of a writer thinks. Listen, hey, I've earned this name. Maybe this is why, but it's just the way my mind works. So in the book, Ethan Frome, without giving too many spoilers, it's a story about this guy who had a lot of potential in his youth. He had actually, in 1926, the setting of this book is though in the 1880s, I believe. He had gone off to college. He was going to be an engineer, but his father got sick and he had to return home to take care of his father. His father died. He wanted to go back to college, but his mother became sick. So he took care of her. And there was one of his, I think it was like his first cousin or something, because back then that was common. Kissing cousins. I mean, there's a term called kissing cousins for a reason. She was 8 years older than Ethan, and she had come to help him take care of his sick mother. The mother died, and this woman is 8 years older than him, had kind of gotten a little unhealthy and kind of worn out taking care of the old woman. And he kind of felt guilty about this because it was his mother and she had helped and she didn't really need to. So he married her. He thought, well, he married her because he felt sympathetic toward her. He didn't marry her because he was in love with her. Well, it turns out she's like 7 or 8 years older than him. I can clearly state this from, I'm 80% of the way through the book. This woman had BPD, borderline personality disorder. And so the story's about how this man has a very, very unhappy, miserable life. And it's because, his life's plans didn't work out. Then he ends up trapping himself by marrying somebody who is not easy to be married to. And this is no disrespect to anybody that's got BPD. I got my own issues. Hey, I don't just have issues. I have entire subscriptions. I mean, look at what they call me. I have rightly earned this moniker. I come into the woods behind my house and talk about weird stuff while we look in the background for potentially a Bigfoot Sasquatch that may or may not live up here. Sometimes I think I see a camel back there. All right, so when the woman also, she's kind of like a hypochondriac, always got something wrong with her, always sick, always in pain. So they bring in one of her cousins, a young woman, like 20-ish. I think the wife's like 30, maybe 40. The husband's like 32. Then they bring in one of her first cousins from the other side, who's about 20. And her parents were both dead. And she was kind of like, she could take care of herself. She could not take care of herself, which was common for women back then. And so they took her in to kind of like take care of her. And in exchange, of course, she did the house chores. It was like having a nanny, or even though they didn't have children, they didn't have any children. The woman she couldn't give birth or whatever. Starting to hear footsteps. Keep watching back here. Well, this young girl gives this guy like new life, reason to live again, right? And so he falls in love with her. He falls in love with his wife's cousin, and his wife's his cousin. There's all kinds of kissing cousins, right? And I'm going to leave it at that. So you read the story, and at first you're like, how could any married man... I'm a married man, and I'm blessed in the wife that I have. She is so great. Perfect. But you'd say, I guess maybe the question is, how could a happily married man fall for this woman that comes... Well, he wasn't happily married. He was married to... And listen... If you do have issues, I hope you get help. There's help out there. There's no excuse not to get help. And I get help for mine. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to be specific, but I know when I need to talk to somebody, and at those times I do. So I understand a lot for like a layman, not as much as 3-star General Jim Price, who views these videos and who's actually a counselor. And many others of you. There's a guy in France who says he teaches psychology or something, and he shows my videos to his students. I didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult, but hey, I need the views. I'll take them. So anyway, he was married to a woman that had BPD and who did not get help for that. They probably didn't. I mean, they didn't know what it was back then, and that's the really neat part. So here's the story that piggybacks off of all of this. And trust me, it's all going to make sense. It's all going to come together here at the end. There's a story we've all heard that I can't help but think has a lot of holes in it. And maybe this will be what Paul Harvey might have called the rest of the story. I remember, going to college back in the early 90s through the late 90s. I basically spent the 90s in college. I would hear these stories because Bill Clinton was the president back then. When I went, I think it was George H.W. Bush. Then Clinton beat him. He was in there for 8 years. I was in college for 6 years. So pretty much it was Bill Clinton most of the time. And you'd hear a story about these two brothers and about choices. And they'd tell a story about There were these two brothers. It was about Bill and his brother Roger. Bill Clinton, his biological father died 3 months before he was born. I don't know if you knew that or not. He had gotten into a car wreck, I think, drove his car into a river and drowned. So Bill Clinton never knew his birth father. His mother, well, he was then sent, after he was born, he went to grow up there in Hope, Arkansas with his grandparents, who really brought him up. They owned a small department store, and this was back before segregation. And they would allow black Americans to purchase items from their store on credit just as much as they would white Americans. And this is Arkansas before segregation. And so they instilled in him, look, we're all human. There's one race, a human race. Because his mother went to nursing school, she got her nursing degree, she got remarried and had his little brother Roger, yada, 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 okay? Bill Clinton became president. And I'm not telling this story because I like him, and I'm not telling this story because I dislike him, okay? I'm just telling you the story because there's some holes in the story that my new mistress, Edith Wharton, has kind of pointed out to me with her story, Ethan Frome. They just didn't know what it was back then. They do now. So Bill Clinton became two-term governor of Arkansas, served as governor, lost re-election, didn't pout about it. He actually apologized to the people of Arkansas and said he was going to spend the next 4 years figuring out how it was that he had let them down. He was going to make it right. 4 years later, he won the governorship again, and then, he served 2 terms as president. Roger, his brother, is a felon. He's spent time in prison for mostly federal drug charges. So this, we would hear the story about how it's all about choice. It's all about personal choice. And you can't blame your parents. You can't, and I agree with this. You can't blame your parents. You can't blame your past. Things happen. What's important is not necessarily what it is that happens to us as much as how we react to what happens to us. We can go through experiences. 2 people can have the same experience and come out with 2 complete different outcomes as far as how that affects their life, because they make a choice in how to react what it was that happened to them. I get that. I'm fully on board with that. But here's, I think, the rest of the story. And I've Googled this because I'm going to tell you this, and I in no way, shape, or form mean to come across as trying to disrespect Bill Clinton's mother. I would not be surprised if Bill and Roger Clinton's mother did not have borderline personality disorder. And for those of you who are not too familiar with this, BPD, basically folks who have this condition, and you can get help, you can get therapy, you can get medication, but these folks are generally the last people to ever try to get help, because it's everybody else in the world that has a problem, not them. And it's not a state of denial, it's a state of delusionalness. But the keynote landmark of this disorder is that there's no gray. There's no gray in life. Everything's either all good or it's all bad. And when you meet these folks, they're usually narcissistic, but they're very pleasant. They're really enjoyable to be around. And so you might meet them and you're like, man, this is my new favorite coworker, or this is my new favorite neighbor, or, this is whatever. Be very careful and just give it time, because they will think the same of you at first, because now you're the best whatever position you're filling in their life, and everyone else is now the worst. There's no such thing as an okay coworker or he's a moderately nice neighbor. You're either all good or you're all bad. And this trickles down to your offspring. If you have children, you're going to have one offspring that's all good, and then you're going to have the other, or others, if you have more than 2, who are all bad. And they don't keep it a secret. They let the favorite know who they are, and they let the non-desirables know who they are. And they do it overtly, and they don't hold back. And I'm going to share an example with you. I know a woman, and I'm not close with her because I was kind of, the first time I met her, I'm going to tell you the story, and you're going to be like, yeah, I'm picking up those vibes too. I was clearly picking up BPD vibes. And I'm not saying shun these people. I'm not saying, oh no, BPD, stay away. We've all got something, okay? So it was that I felt she had this condition and she had never gotten any help. And that's dangerous for me. I'm not going to spend time with those folks. If you're getting help, if you're doing the best you can with what you've got available, I'll spend eternity with you. But if nope, everybody else in the world has a problem, not me, hey, I'm part of that rest of the world that's got problems. I'm not going to bring them around you, bro. I'm just going to get away. You know what I'm saying? It's not safe. I don't hang out with toxic people. So this woman, she was telling me about her children. She was telling me about how great her daughter was, how smart her daughter was, how much her daughter studied and did everything right. And she was just great, perfect. And that daughter did go on to do well. This was years ago. That daughter got out of college in 4 years. She got a sweet job as soon as she graduated. She went through one of those things senior year, like spring semester, and sat down and did interviews when these corporations will come to the universities and try to meet with the graduating seniors. She had a job lined up before she walked across the stage to get her diploma, and she finished like top 10 in her class at a large college. She got, I think it was 80-some thousand that first year, and she's the girl's probably late 20s now. She's well over 100,000, killing it in life. Okay, and then she would talk about her son. Now here's the thing: her son was in the room at the time. Her son was a senior in high school, and she was going on and on and on about the daughter. I was like, wow, that's great. So I look over at the son. Good-looking young man, looked like all-American kid next door. I didn't see a flaw. He probably didn't have a flaw to be seen, unless you were his mother and you had borderline personality disorder. So I said, what about you? What's your plans? And his mother starts speaking for him. He puts his head down, and she goes on and on about how, oh God, he's probably not even going to graduate from high school. I was like, what? Because he was a senior that year. She said, well, he's got to do a book report on a novel. He gets to choose between 5 of the classics. And I was like, oh, I love those. I read all those. I said, you're going to like those books. You'll enjoy them. He won't read them. He's just lazy. He's got no work ethic. He's got no drive. He's got no ambition. I doubt he's going to graduate high school. He's not going to college. He's not college material. And I felt so bad for him, but I didn't want him to feel embarrassed, by showing it. And so I look over and I'm like, I'm sure it's not all that. I'm sure you're going to do great. He had the countenance of somebody. You can tell I'm reading from the 1850s. I use the word countenance, of someone who, that's all he's ever heard. That's all he's ever heard. That's all he's ever known. He was a couple years younger than his sister. And where is he now? Still living with his mom, never went to college, works off and on. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's my point. And it made me remember, and I put all this together, reading Ethan Frome, understanding more today about borderline personality disorder than anybody did in 1926. And I just happened to remember that story about the Clinton brothers. And it makes me wonder, and Bill Clinton, and I'm not judging him, it's no secret that he liked the ladies. He spent time with, it used to be alleged, but we know it's not alleged anymore, okay? We know it was fact. Now, I'm not talking about people who claim that he forced himself out. None of that. He had a lot of girlfriends, and he used to have state troopers take him around to see his mistresses. That's not uncommon for men who were raised by women who have borderline personality disorder, because they learn it's all about pleasing a woman because they're trying to please mom. People have often wondered because his last name was not Clinton at birth. That's not his birth name. He had people have asked, why did he change his birth name? I'm sure he's got a great answer for it. But could the truth be because he didn't want to upset his mother? Because they say hell hath no wrath like a woman scorned. What about a woman with BPD? And Roger, the brother, was he the one that was told his whole life, oh, well, since you're not the good kid and there is no gray area because I have BPD, you must absolutely be the bad kid. You're going to grow up and be a piece of crap. You're going to be in and out of prison and blah, blah, blah. That's what he did. Because children will place such a premium on the words that come out of their parents' mouths. See you next time for more.